how does it grab you of Christian McCaffrey and Brian Robinson in a backfield together?
Oh, I like it. First of all, a running back in the Shanahan scheme grabs me pretty well. The role for him to be a secondary option, and they wanted a additive insurance policy, right? But he's a guy that can have success in the league, but he's a singles hitter. You need doubles and extra base hits if you're going to be a primary option.
Grant, how's Deebo look?
Fast.
Let's get out to the River Islands guest line. We've been looking forward to talking to Grant Paulson of 106.7 The Fan in D.C. with all the action between the Commanders and Niners, culminating in Brian Robinson Jr. being traded to the Niners. Grant, thanks for coming on. How are you?
Fellas, my pleasure. Yeah, when I hear that the Commanders made a trade, I often wonder, well, what did they get and what did the 49ers give them?
Right. Yeah, we got a little pipeline going here, don't we?
The Adam Peters pipeline is strong. Yep. I guess it even started before that with the Chase Young deal, predating Adam Peters. But, yeah, it seems like these two teams don't mind hooking up.
You could go back to Trent Williams if you wanted to, actually, as well. Yes, they've gotten together a number of times. Today is no different. So tell us what brought the Commanders to want to move on from Robinson and who the Niners are getting.
We don't talk about the Trent Williams trade, just so you guys know. That one, we don't put that one on the list.
Fair enough.
Look, the Brian Robinson trade was, frankly, a deal that I think makes sense from both perspectives. Washington was going to release the player if they couldn't trade him. And the idea that they got a sixth-round pick is being viewed as a significant win today in town. It also tells me that there was a market. I was told that there were multiple teams that were interested in him. I don't know how many reached out, but we have heard from national reports that the Saints and Browns are among the teams that have been calling on running backs. I think it would make sense if the Dolphins were also curious with what's going on with Devin Achane. So by giving up a six, it tells you that the 49ers probably felt like there's a good chance other teams, perhaps in front of them in the waiver wire claiming process, would have had their chance at Robinson, and they wanted an additive insurance policy, right? But Robinson himself, the story is pretty fascinating here. He had just fallen out of favor. He was not this regime's guy. He was drafted by the previous regime. They inherited him last year. He was their first and second down rusher with Austin Ekeler on third downs and pass-catching situations. And there were multiple times throughout the year, I think, where they would continue to try to shape a role that worked for him. He wasn't a great fit for Cliff Kingsbury. He's a fine player. He is a hard runner. He's a thumper. He's an effective goal line carrier. And I think he's a guy that can have success in the league in the right situation, but he's a singles hitter in a league where you need doubles and extra base hits if you're going to be a primary option. And he just wasn't going to be their number one guy anymore. And when that was the case, it felt like both on their front and certainly from Robinson's, I don't know how much interest they had in working together if he was going to be standing on the sideline a whole bunch.
It's interesting. Grant, I wonder if he's still a quality back. I know maybe the fit there in Washington wasn't great, but it's not as if this guy is a scrub and doesn't deserve to be on an NFL roster. So do you think it's just specifically fit and maybe what the coaching staff wants out of their running backs as opposed to this guy not being a quality back anymore? Because, he's been the lead back for all 3 years that he's been in the NFL, and you guys, the Commanders, were going to cut him. That seems kind of difficult to believe for me.
Yeah, so it's twofold, right? I think to start, the role for him would be to be a secondary option in short yardage, and-to-one situations, goal line scenarios. I think if he's a guy getting 200 carries in a season, everything around him has to be really good for that to turn into 1,000 yards. Like, this is not a guy that's going to average 5 yards per carry. He's not a guy that has great vision, in my opinion, or makes people miss. He's a thumper. If you look at some of the deep analytics, and Washington's gone much deeper into data, thank God, with this new front office and with some of the research and development that they've built out in office with. If you look at just like DVOA for last season on their roster, of their 4 running backs, he was distantly fourth. Basically it was like 32%, 27%, 15% with their 3 guys, and then Robinson was minus 4%. If you look at like rushing yards over expected, right, what's blocked and what do you get? He was a guy in the league that was routinely not in the top 20 or 25. In fact, since he came into the league, he ranks 89th, I believe it is, in percentage of carries that turned into 10 or more yards. Now, that's not a stat that's just about him, right? I don't want to suggest that it is. It's not like they've been a dominant run-blocking team. Some of that is scheme and what you're trying to accomplish. But he hits singles there is not a home run in the bat. And occasionally he could run into a double if everything's blocked up well, but they wanted explosiveness. They wanted some twitch at the second level. They wanted some make you miss in the open field, and that's not him. And I don't know that they would have drafted like his skill set in a world where they were taking, a back in his draft. But the bottom line is when you're not their guy, when they take a guy in the 7th round, they had like a 4th round grade on, and they have another player a lot like him who's cheaper and younger, and Chris Rodriguez. He was just the odd man out. And I don't know, again, if you sign a guy like Brian Robinson and bring him in, and that player knows when they're coming in, like their role is going to be minimal, it's probably not a problem. But when you go to a guy for 3 years who's done nothing wrong necessarily, and you say, hey, now you're going to stand around a bunch, and there might be weeks where you're not active, that just wasn't going to go over well. And I get the sense that that's how we got to a point where Dan Quinn's addressing the team to say he's not with us anymore the day before a preseason game last week.
So, Grant, how does it grab you from a strategic standpoint, the idea of Christian McCaffrey and Brian Robinson in a backfield together and the problems that would present to a defense?
Oh, I like it. I like the pairing. I like the tandem. First of all, a running back in the Shanahan scheme grabs me pretty well. Like, I don't care who it is or, what the name is necessarily. I covered Mike for 4 years here when he was in Washington with Kyle as the offensive coordinator and play caller, the zone blocking scheme for years. Generally, they get the best out of backs. If you would have told me, a couple days ago that Kyle would be ultra interested in Brian Robinson, I would have been a little surprised because I don't think of him as just like your prototypical zone rusher. But I will say, if I remember correctly, didn't Kyle draft or wasn't he involved in putting Carlos Hyde over for a little while? I think it's kind of that type of back. So maybe he would factor that into the type of running back that he likes. But I just think if you pair him with McCaffrey, I think you get a really nice 1-2 punch. And I think Robinson spelling him brings a completely different element, a powerful punch that he can pack. Again, I think in short yardage, I don't know how they've done in terms of having a sledgehammer to pick up those short yardage, critical downs and distances, but I think he can do that. And I also think on the goal line, not that they need that with McCaffrey's abilities, but I think he can really help them. The way I view it more so than that, though, is I think he's just insurance. Like if something's going to or will happen to McCaffrey, I think he's part of a committee that would help replace him. And I don't know that you're going to get somebody much better than him that gets released in the next several days when you look at his track record. Again, here people were down on him just because he doesn't allow for explosives or big plays. But there's certainly a role for a guy like this in the league, and a 6th-round pick makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. And as a backup running back, it makes a lot of sense as well. I'm curious now what this means for the Commanders' backfield, and I know we got a lot of listeners who are probably getting ready to do fantasy drafts, and this becomes a big question around the league. I mean, you mentioned Austin Ekeler, and for those of us that watched the Monday night preseason game, we saw Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt have a nice game. How do you think the Washington backfield is going to turn out now without Brian Robinson?
You misspoke. You meant Walter Payton when you said Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, people are so steamed up for Bill, as they call him, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Like, the hype train has left the station in a big way. I guess I'm part of the problem. I was out there at training camp and was blown away and really impressed because you just don't expect a 7th-round pick to be the best back in camp, and he was. And so I think he's going to heavily factor into the first and second down workload as the year goes on. But it's not like it's going to be him solely right away. I would be very surprised. Chris Rodriguez, who I mentioned, is a power back. He's Robinson-like with a little more speed, in my opinion. He was the guy that ripped off a 40-yard run you may have seen on national TV on Monday Night Football and got the first carry of the game, kind of post-Robinson. He's going to be in the mix, especially down around the goal line. So that's a guy that was worth snagging late in the fantasy draft as well. I don't think they're going to have a built-in 1 and 2 on the depth chart, right? I think Eckler's the one guy that has the obvious carved-out role, third downs, pass-catching situations, 2-minute, 4-minute offense, end of halves. He'll be out there. He'll occasionally get work first and second, but they're trying to avoid as much of that as they can to just keep him healthy and on the field. Durability issues at his age, concussion problems last year. So Merritt, when it is called for, when the best situation in the matchup against the defense is some burst, some speed, is probably the guy. If they need someone to be a bit of a battering ram, I think Rodriguez probably is the guy. I don't know if it's going to be an ideal fantasy situation unless one of those guys really gets hot. But I guess if I was to just say, long-winded answer, one of them ends up being a fantasy stalwart, Krosky Merritt has a better chance than Rodriguez, who's several years into the league and feels more like a change of pace thumper.
Grant, this sounds like a Bill Belichick fantasy nightmare. That's what it sounds like, actually.
Yeah, I don't know if Dan Quinn is worried about my fantasy team with how he's going to operate this. I don't know if he's going to go full Belichick, but, it's almost to me like we talk about this in baseball. Like if you have 2 first basemen, or in hockey you have 2 goalies, you don't have one. Like I think if they had a guy they really liked, then they would just plug that player in on first and second. He'd get the 150 carries Robinson got last year or whatever. They're still learning Krosky Merritt. They have no idea what to expect. He's worked very limitedly in the preseason and has never played a game, obviously, as a rookie 7th rounder who played 1 college game last year. It's not like there's a lot of tape. So they're going to find this out as they go. I just don't know that they have their answer yet.
Hey, Grant, how's Deebo look?
Fast. He actually looks productive. This has been an ultra-impressive camp, I'll be honest. I was skeptical might be strong, but curious, I'll say, coming out of minicamp especially. But I think he probably was their camp MVP or one of them. What they did was interesting. They didn't have him on the field for nearly as many reps as I would have expected with the ones, but they would get him out there, they'd get him work. So if he was out there for 4 or 5 snaps, he would get 2 or 3 targets and a carry or something, and then he'd be back on the sideline. So they seemed to get a lot of work with the little bit of time he was on the grass. But I don't know if you guys saw his 1 carry of the preseason was the first play of their dress rehearsal against the Bengals. Elk cut up the field on an end-around jet action, ripped off 19. He looked like Deebo of a couple years ago. Look, we got to see it. He's got to stay healthy. He's got to stay in shape, all of those things that were knocks coming over. But I don't think he could have had a camp that would have me feeling better than what I saw out in Ashburn over the last few weeks at practice.
Well, and what's happening with his counterpart? How's the McLaurin thing going to get figured out?
I just think at some point, guys, he's got to show up and play football. I mean, I don't know what the other options are. Look, he has no real leverage. I mean, if they really want to, they could franchise tag him next year at about $29 million and have him under contract for 2 years and around $50 million. That's within their rights and prerogatives. So he can continue to hold out and not show if he wants to do that. But there's no real precedent other than Le'Veon Bell in recent NFL history under this CBA of a guy sitting out an extensive part of the season. And that essentially killed Le'Veon Bell's career. I mean, he was never the same. That's the end for me is that he shows up, tail between his legs, and plays football. The question is, can they get a deal done in the meantime? And while there's a small chance of that, I would say it dwindles by the day. It's just amazing that we're here because I know you guys are cross-country out of market, but I mean, I have not been around a more professional, like team-first, leader-of-men type player, maybe in any sport, as a media member, and certainly around here during this horrific era of non-winning. So for him to be the fly in the ointment of an otherwise pretty harmonious preseason process is just stunning.